So welcome to SVG Magic. We're going to talk about just sort of, I'm not going to get real deep into like anything specific, but I'm going to kind of do a high-level overview of what SVGs are and animation, integration, libraries, accessibility, and support. I've added an extra slide as of this morning talking to some people, which is security, so we'll talk about that a little bit as well. My name is Anthony Horn. I'm a web developer at UC Davis. I work on a team that manages our campus CMS and does custom recharge work for campus. So we just build a lot of websites and provide solutions and basically help people get what they need to get their projects going. So anything from websites to sort of research data and collecting and stuff like that. So what is an SVG? SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphic. And so on the web we kind of have, in graphic design in general, you kind of have two types of graphic. You have bitmap graphics and vector graphics. A bitmap graphic you've seen as JPEGs and GIFs and PNGs. And so essentially those are just images that are created by taking a whole bunch of colored dots and organizing them in some sort of pattern to make an image. So the problem with those is when you zoom in close on those or zoom out or scale them in any way or screen resolution changes, you can end up with things if you don't have a high enough enough bits, you end up with something grainy looking. And so the beauty of vector graphics is a vector graphic is using math essentially. So in this example, and so SVGs are written using XML format, and you can see there that there is a like where it says circle. That's saying that okay, go create a circle, and it's giving it some coordinates, and so that way the browser can render a shape using those coordinates, and that way you can, no matter what, how big or small you make that image, it's it's the same size image because it's the same code no matter what, whether it's 50 feet tall or 1 inch tall. And it's great for that purpose. We use it in graphic design a lot for the same thing. When you send files to print, you want them to be crystal clear no matter how big or small it gets printed. And then one of the beauties of SVG is you can scale it, as we just talked about, animate and style it. So you can use a couple different methods that we'll talk about to animate it, and styling, of course, with CSS. So creating SVGs. So all right, SVGs sound cool. How do I create these things? You can create an SVG a couple different ways. We just looked at a little bit of code, XML code that makes an SVG. So if you have the XML chops, you could go out and just open up any text editor and start writing an SVG. Usually not a big deal if it's something simple, a square, a circle, maybe a path with a few other extra items here and there. Not a big deal, but for the most part you're going to want to use some sort of graphic design tool like Adobe Illustrator. We use Adobe Cloud, so I have access to that, and I've been using that for years, and that is pretty good with it, so I like it, and I haven't really found anything else that works for me. There are a bunch of other tools out there, Inkscape, Boxy SVG. There's a couple different free tools or online tools where you can sort of create SVGs as well. So animation, there's a couple of different ways to animate an SVG. Three major ones. There is CSS, so you can use CSS keyframing or CSS animations or transitions. You can use SMIL, which is sort of SVG's built-in animation functions. You can see there's an animate tag there, and so you can animate using that syntax. And then with JavaScript. So that snippet I'm showing there is using something called Snap SVG. So it's a JavaScript library that allows you to animate SVGs with that. Embedding SVGs. All right, so figured out what I need to do to go create one of these things. And then you export it as a .svg file, say from Illustrator. And now I got this thing. How do I get it on a web page? So you got a couple options. There's the object tag, image tag. You can use CSS. You can use the CSS image property or the background image property. You can put it inline using SVG tag. You can use a iframe or an embed tag. So I just give you a whole bunch of options. What do you use? Well, it depends on the situation. So most situations, if you want dynamic effects, so if you have an SVG that you want to, say, change the fill colors of some of the elements of that SVG, or you want to use some JavaScript to animate it, and you're going to have some sort of interactive element, or put some links in it, or something like that, you are going to want to use the object tag. That is the most versatile tag for all of that sort of stuff. If you have images without any interaction, so it's a logo, it just sits there, but you want it to look nice and crisp at any size, use the image tag, and we'll talk about accessibility in a minute, but for static images, if you can get away with it, use the image tag. That's the best way to do that. And of course, as far as static images go, CSS, you can use those properties as well to add an SVG to your page with CSS. Again, a little less accessible with CSS than the image tag, much less. If the situation calls for it, I've gotten in issues with where I've had to use an iframe, which is just because I was trying to get something in some place that it needed to be, and there wasn't a way to do it the other way because of Drupal and things getting filtered out through whatever. And so there are situations where you can do that. The inline is just literally the SVG tag. Everything inside that SVG tag can go into an SVG file and be linked via like the object tag. And it's the same deal with an iframe. You're just linking to a file. But you can also do it inline, so that SVG tag can just be dumped right into an HTML file, and you can write all your SVG code. And don't use the embed tag. Apparently, just don't use it. It's I guess not part of the spec. If I'm saying that right. So that's the recommendation, is to just leave that alone. Get lots of other options. Okay, libraries. There's a ton of them. There's a whole bunch of JavaScript libraries out there to do it. I grabbed 3 just to sort of show you got some options you can look at. So SVG.js is a lightweight library for manipulating animating SVGs. Snap SVG is designed for modern browsers and therefore supports the newest SVG features like masking, clipping, patterns, full gradients, groups, and more. I have to imagine, because I know I've had run into that stuff before with inside of Illustrator. You can get crazy with all kinds of Illustrator masking and stuff like that, and sometimes that doesn't translate, or at least the SVG it outputs, if you just then drop it in a web page, certain links just don't work because SVG support isn't there for them. So I assume that Snap SVG sort of acts like a polyfill of sorts to let you do some of those features on the web. And then Bonsai is a JavaScript graphical library. So the difference with Bonsai is you're writing JavaScript, which is then, I believe, generating all of the code for your SVG, whereas I think some of the other libraries, like SVG.js, is really just manipulating the SVG that exists there. I actually have a couple of examples for that. Let's see. It's a plan. There it goes. So this is using, I should show what this one's using. This one is using... Alright, I did a terrible job of saying what these ones are using. So I got 3 examples here. One of them is using each of those libraries we were just looking at. Since this one is targeting the HTML tag, this one must be the first one. What was the first one? Let's just go back real quick. So SVG.js, Snap SVG, and Bonsai. So I have to assume that's the order. So width, window, inner, window height. Yeah, it's just targeting the HTML tag. Create SVG. So it's basically just using JavaScript to give it a bunch. There's the big circle, and there's a size, and I think I changed the size from 80 to 90, and if you watch the clock real close, boom, change it, just up the size. So you can see how you can manipulate the SVG with the, and there's the hour lines and the minutes lines. So basically it's just going through and you're building the SVG element by element in JavaScript and then putting it all together in Animate. There's a rotate, some rotate stuff there. Yeah, and I'm showing that this is using SVG.js. The next one is, so this one has an SVG already existing, and there's some CSS there, style things, and this is Snap.js, right? And so Snap, it's the same deal. It's being manipulated, so you have a bunch of options. You know, there's all your container, weather, leaf, sun. So all those elements have been defined in JavaScript, and it allows you to go and manipulate those. This thing's actually kind of cool. In a second here, I'll click through like the different seasons, and you know, these can get pretty intense. I got an example I'm going to show you guys. I try to keep most of the examples, my examples that I've built to show you guys, pretty simple. But some of this stuff, you know, this stuff's pretty. You got to dedicate some time to this sort of thing. There's some lightning. All right, so let's talk about accessibility a little bit. So this is, yeah, we're going to look at a way to add some accessibility to interactive SVGs.
www.apple.com. SVG Accessibility demo, web content. You are currently on web content. To enter the web area, press Control, Option, Shift, down arrow.
I'm about to hit the interactive one.
You are currently on image, inside of a frame. To exit this web area, press Control, Option, Shift, up arrow.
So it identified as
tab and is super accessible, but cannot be interactive. Image. You are currently on image, inside.
And so, jumped. So, just, I'll tell you what you guys just heard there. This top square is the interactive SVG, so that's in the object tag. The bottom one is just an inline, or not inline, but it's an image tag that just linked to an SVG. So the image, when I mentioned that earlier, the image tag is the most accessible thing I've found as far as SVG. So if you do have a static SVG, just use the image tag, because you heard there, it read off the alt tag, it identified it as an image. Whereas the object tag, you'll see that there is that role image and aria labeled by title and description. Those two are identifying. It's kind of like the relationship between like the label, like you're doing forms, the label has a for attribute that identifies the ID of the input. It's similar to that. So that aria labeled by has a title and description, which identify the title and description IDs below. But I couldn't access that stuff. Like I never got to say my square or four sides. I tried, you heard I tried to drill into it, and it drilled in, and it gave me this sort of like no more elements. So essentially, as far as accessibility and screen readers go, and there are a bunch of different voiceover or screen readers. I'm just testing with VoiceOver, which is natively on your Mac, and you can go find a big chart that tells you, well, VoiceOver will read these tags, but not these ones, and this one will do this one. So it depends on the screen reader, what it will and won't pick up. Some are better for different things than other, and I assume people that need those tools, you pick the tool that's right for them. So. There's been a lot of talks on accessibility this week, and I think my understanding is, when we're in higher ed, we have an accessibility department or disabilities department. If you have any questions, build something, send it over there, ask them for feedback. They'll send it back, and just do that. Don't try and decide what's best, but obviously try to do something. But yeah, keep an eye on that. There's a link there to CSS Tricks accessibility stuff. I'll throw some more links. I got some good information earlier. I'll throw some links on the Badcamp page for this talk if you want to go check that out. So, do your best. You want to make things as accessible as you can, if you can.
www.apple.com.
Right, and this is just an example of how the image tag is. Much simpler than the kind of the other one. Support. It's well supported. You can see, everything is pretty green there. Using can I use, except for some old Android browser and IE 6 through 8, and we all care a lot about IE 6 through 8, right? Okay, good. So yeah, and it was a partial support. There's a couple of those little number 2s. Desktop and mobile don't properly scale SVG files. I've seen those issues before in like IE 11. It's usually something that can be pretty easily fixed with a little CSS. So, like I said, I've had those, exactly what that's describing happen. Someone's like, it's not working right, and I look at it and I'm like, sure enough, in your browser, it's not working right. Here's a little CSS, make it a blockable element or something, and it works. All right, the security slide. So, this came up earlier. Uploading SVG is the concern. That's really the only, as far as I know, that's the only security concern currently, is the fact that SVG does allow you to embed JavaScript and CSS directly into a .svg file. So, we get that complaint all the time. They're like, we got this amazing theme, why can't I just upload a .svg file through the, say the appearance settings in my Drupal site? And I say, I don't know, it just won't let you or whatever. Or someone says, no, don't do that. I'm like, why? I don't know. So this is the reason, because you can embed that. You basically do cross-site scripting through an SVG file, and you don't want people doing that. So JavaScript is the issue, and cross-site scripting text. So there's got to be some solution where you can run it through a filter. I know we have there's some file upload tools that will do like a security scan on files that are uploaded to your Drupal site. I don't have any of those off the top of my head to tell you about, but go check it out. I'm sure you can find something that would properly filter for that stuff. If not, go build a module, please, and share it with me. All right, so demo time. So this is Bad Camp. Let's look at how SVGs we can do some cool stuff with SVGs and Drupal. So again, same order as this whole speech. Start with Illustrator. So I started my little demo here. I started by building a little man and woman graphic, and then I gave them, some accessories, some headwear, and so I got all these little components. I got them well grouped and titled, because when you export your SVGs from Illustrator, it will put all those things in a little G tag for group and put all the elements inside there, and then it will assign an ID for the names of those. So I probably should have left the capital letter off the front or the top, but should have done all lowercase, but oh well. And you can see. Oh, what's that?
What are you using? What's the application you're using?
Adobe Illustrator.
Okay.
It's fine. We'll show you this part again. So yeah, it's paths and stuff. And is there show of hands who's used Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator? So we got. You guys like SVGs then? So you'll notice that I didn't add any color to any of the accessories. They're all gray. So then you save it as an SVG, and you can open it in a code editor, that SVG file that it creates. And you'll see there's a little bit of styling at the top there that comes out. So, I didn't have a huge color palette, so it's pretty minimal there. And you can see there's all those groups, and there's those IDs: cap, beanie, tiara, man, woman, sword. So those are all my elements grouped how they were in that little layers panel. And then I go and I have a template, a twig template, and I am putting just putting the SVG content directly in there. You can see the SVG tag starts right there. Here's all my paths we were just looking at. And then I start writing some conditional code with Twig that says, hey, if this, I got a content type called avatar, and so there's a bunch of fields, and so if they choose man or woman, show this chunk of SVG. If not, or this group. If not, show that group. And then I have some CSS. So item colors. So I have I'm actually going back and coloring some of those items that were gray with some colors, and I'm coloring the headwear with some colors. And there's a little bit of animation there. So this is the Drupal side. I have a content type called avatar. It's got some fields: animate, colorize, Drupalize, gender, headwear, and items. And the display kind of doesn't matter because I'm hijacking the whole thing with the Twig template anyway. And so we're going to go create one of our avatars. We're going to give it a name. Call it King. We're going to give him royal headwear. He's going to have a sword. And ta-da! There's King with his sword. So let's go create another one. We'll create an avatar. And so this is where my little Twig conditional template, or Twig conditions, get tricky. They both have royal headwear, and we're going to give her one. And you'll notice she gets different headwear because it's saying, hey, if it's a woman, they choose royal headwear, give her the royal lady's royal headwear. If it's a man, give him the male headwear. We can colorize. You'll see the accessories now all have colors instead of being gray. We can animate it. So this adds a class that allows this animation, CSS animation. And then if we want to Drupalize her, she gets a Drupal code. So, and then the same thing for the king. We're going to turn on all his fancy stuff. Let's Drupalize him, animate him, and colorize him. And there you go. So I built this as just sort of relatively simple example to show you. Go ahead, Tristan. What's up?
So those drop downs, is that?
Those are just list fields. Those are just list fields with a key value pair.
So it's not taxonomy?
No, I thought about that, and I was like, that seems complicated to go build this whole taxonomy and have to build a relationship. And you could do that. You could absolutely do that. And you could even go as far as to do something like build a taxonomy for items, and then you could have a field for the SVG there, and you could have people, like, if I could go build just a sword in Illustrator, export that SVG, drop it in. Again, no, you wouldn't want to do that because of security issues, because you don't want people putting SVGs through the interface, so I'm just going to retract that whole statement.
My next question is, when you're in the Twig template then, so are you just basically like saying dependent on the value of that select list, then it runs the logic that chooses what renders out of your SVG?
Yeah, here, so we can look at that real quick. So so here's my Twig template.
I'm not seeing anything.
Does it move this way? It does. There it goes. So here's my Twig template. And just checking time. Here's my Twig template, and so wrapper stuff. I'm attaching the library. This is where my CSS is getting attached. So I have my CSS file is called Avatar, and it's being attached as a library. And these, I don't know how to make it bigger. Do you?
Apple plus plus will do for now.
I don't know if that works in PHP Storm.
Preferences and font.
No, it doesn't work in PHP Storm. I know. I tried. It sucks. I think there's a checkbox deep in preferences that will let me use the scroll to zoom, but I'm not going to mess with that right now. Well, let's just see. We got time.
Well, there's a presentation mode, I think, under view.
Presentation
Just go
mode.
to preferences, you can search for font.
Nice bit size, alright. Alright.
Yay.
Yay.
Nicely done.
Alright, so some wrapper stuff. This is where our classes are getting added. So it's doing a little check here, some, what's that called? Ternary check for, if that, a lot of those checkboxes are all just Booleans. They're ones or zeros. They come back true or false. So, if it's true, give it this class. If it's false, don't give it a class. If it's true, give this class. Otherwise, don't give it a class. And so those classes are what's causing the animation and the color. So there's also, so then my SVG starts here, and there's a couple inline styles. These could really come out of here. They were just sitting in there, and I didn't move them over. And so yeah, here's the, again, this is this value is returning either balloon or nothing. So balloon, sword, wand, those are all items. So there's only one value getting passed in for item, and if it's balloon, this shows, and none of these are going to show. And then the gender is a Boolean, so if it's one, you get the guy, and I just have an else there. So if it's not one, it shows the lady. And here's the headwear, and same deal. It's a list, so it comes back with one of these values. Unfortunately, Twig doesn't have like a switch case, some sort of switch case syntax. So unfortunately, in Twig, when you have some sort of you got one value and a bunch of different outcomes for whatever the value in that list, that array is or whatever. You just have to do else if, which is not great. But I hear Twig's got a new version coming out, so we'll have to see if that gets fixed. Does that everybody kind of understand what's going on there?
Yeah, I didn't realize you were actually embedding the Twig logic inside the SVG.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I was thinking about it too. I mean, you could do something like if you had a map of the U.S. and you had all your little states and stuff, and you had we'll just use that example. And then you wanted to call out what colleges were in those states. You could have some sort of view that just loops through and puts things into just make a Twig template for your view sort of thing, or your view row results and outputs stuff into the thing, or changes colors. And you could have you could do a lot of crazy stuff with this and Twig and SVG. And as we talked about this earlier a little bit, it's just there's not no security concern here because the only person that's writing Twig templates is you as the developer. And if you want to hack your own site, go for it. Oh, it's here. Yeah, what's up?
So what are the limitations of using CSS with it? So I noticed that a lot of the different parts of this XML, but I see classes all over the place. Can I put borders around things? Can I put background colors? Because when I've worked with SVG logos in the past, some things seem to work in some instances. How does what are the limitations with CSS with animated versions?
And it does have, as far as like the CSS elements you're applying are a little bit different. Like you wouldn't use a background color, you would use a fill. So I'm using fill to change the color of the hat because you're filling that path. So the syntax is a little bit different and what you're targeting is a little bit different. But I mean, there are things that are saying, like if I wanted to link the sword to a Wikipedia article on swords, like I could wrap it in an A tag. Or is it an A tag? Does anyone know? I've done this before. Yeah, it's an A tag in href and you send it off. You can put hrefs on some other, or there's a bunch of attributes. Please just look, don't take my word for it. Look up the spec. There's lots of documentation on all the different stuff you want to target with CSS and the different elements that you can put. You can see there's a rectangle, polygon, there's a path. So depending on what you're creating, there's different syntax for all that stuff, and there's lots and lots of different attributes that do different things. But as far as CSS goes, most of the time the only thing I'm doing is changing colors, maybe applying gradient or something, that sort of stuff. And the animation, of course.
Is there a way to strip out from Illustrator, I guess specifically, all those extra classes and the styling?
Absolutely, yeah. You can strip them out right here if you want.
That's true, I guess. But
I'm using a lot of those, like I'm using the class item on all those. So that way I can blanket with that parent class of like colorize. I can colorize all the items. So I have kind of a generic class.
I've just run into problems where like two different SVGs are utilizing the same class, and I'm trying to style things, and it's affecting both, and it's like.
Yeah, and I don't care for, by default, it gives them a bunch of classes of like STR1, STR2, STR3. Yeah, I usually go through and replace all that stuff with something that makes more sense. Alright, and so if you go to that GitHub link, I'm going to share this on the Backcamp page. That link goes to a GitHub repository that has this as a module, so if you want to play with it, you can just download the module and throw it in your Drupal site. So let's look at some SVG in action. So we looked at some kind of a broad view of all the cool stuff SVG. There's some extra cool things that I've seen with SVGs, and I thought we could just look at. So vector images, of course, very cool. SVG video filters. So there's a filter attribute or a filter element that you can use on an SVG that applies SVG filters, and we'll look at that in a second. There are masks, so you can mask stuff, which is another cool thing, and we'll also look at that. Interactive teaching tools, animated buttons, statistics, sort of like you could do some cool reports and stuff. Here, I got another demo video. So that's the masking. So essentially there's just a embedded video there, and then you've got an SVG layered over top of it, and you can see that the SVG has a text element, and you're just changing the text in there, and it just is masking over the video. So really cool effect, that would otherwise be video editing. So I mean, you could write some crazy JavaScript to make the letters change and rewrite it like it's a typewriter. So it's type and then backspace and then type in. This is the filtering stuff I was talking about. So you'll see there's SVG, there's your SVG, and then there's this filter element here, and it's got an ID, but that FE Gaussian blur, and you'll see they wrote some JavaScript to make that button work so that you can sort of demo all that stuff. So you can see there's an array there with all the different types of filter, and that iteration melt is basically just changing. It's just changing the type of filter that's on there when you click the button. So if you click through here, you'll see there's a blur. And so there's a video sitting back there, and there's an SVG sitting over top of it, and it's using a filter to just basically apply an effect to that video. So you got this super cool way to sort of alter videos on the fly. There's black and white, blue fill, displacement, and there's blur again. So this is what I meant by interactive teaching tool. This is one of the examples at Snap SVG, and you see every time you click on like one of these coffee drinks, it shows you how to make it. It's like, hey, there's the proportions, there's the recipe, and it's just a fun tool. You know, we're in education, create some cool tool to educate people on something. We've got, this is just SVG animation stuff, so just a cool use of animation on a button. There's an SVG sitting there that's a rectangle, and they're just using, again, like my example, using CSS to animate it. So there's their draw keyframe set, and then at the bottom there you can see it's animation draw being activated. I love this stuff. You know, there's lots of JavaScript libraries that do the same sort of thing, but it's just animation with SVG, and so you could take some data and spit it, like, again, out of like views or something, and use the data to create some animated graph. These are cool. So these again are using to be honest, no idea how this actually works, but there's that Gaussian blur, so they're using those filters, and they're animating, I'm sure they're doing some sort of blending of animation. It's like a morph almost, to do this gooey effect, they call it, where it's kind of like stuff like goos out, which is pretty cool. I've seen a lot of really cool interfaces, you know, sort of mobile style interfaces created with this stuff. It's a very sort of native app experience. And there's a bunch of different versions of it, but you can see that they're using a little animation and those filters to create that goo effect. And then, yeah, I think that's the last one. But so lots of really cool ways to sort of do stuff with SVG. And that's pretty much the end of my presentation. So we got time for questions.
So how's the file size / page weight for this stuff?
File size is usually tiny because, you know, it's just text, it's code, you know, it's as streamlined as, you know, yes, if you have like, so good example of something that's a little bit larger, like I have that, let's go back, like this is something I built for recently, and we get that request all the time, can we get a map of the United States, and when you hover over a state, it does this and that, and a million years ago, I did the same sort of stuff with like the image map stuff in HTML. But this is a way better way to do this, and so let me move this over here. You know, this SVG is huge because there's a path for every state in the United States, and then there's a class for the type of state it is. It just goes on and on and on and on and on and on. So, still, pretty sure that is a tiny file because it's just text. And then, you know, of course, you know, I've got some CSS that makes it so when you hover over any of these things, it highlights the state, and those, I don't know what I do, I broke it. And then you click on any of these things, and it links off to the University of Vermont. Oh, that's what I broke, I clicked on the link. Apparently it doesn't like to link within CodePen. So yeah, and those just link off. And so, yeah, I mean, I can't imagine an SVG ever being as big as some of, you know, 50 megs. I mean, I'm sure this thing's even under, probably 400K or maybe max. Yeah.
I don't know why I thought of it.
We're heavy, yeah. No, I mean, that's the beauty of them. That's why PNGs and JPEGs and all those things, especially when you're like, oh, we got to upload a gigantic image so it works on all these, you know, really high resolution screens. You got this file that's just got 10 billion colors, and it's and you know, it's PNGs, I think sometimes are lighter. They have an alpha channel and stuff, so I think some things are heavier. I don't know. There's always the right tool for the job. But yeah, those things, sometimes they get huge, and then you got to process them down, or you run them through, you know, image styles, and you let that do all the processing, which works, you know. But there's always a tool for the job. I wouldn't use an SVG for a photo. In fact, I think you can. I think you can put a photo in there, like linked to an image, and within the SVG tag, because there's nothing wrong with that in graphic design. Because, you know, if I'm creating just like a brochure or something in Illustrator, I could export it as an SVG with a graphic image, but it's just linking off to a JPEG file and importing it into it when it displays. But on the web, I don't know, I guess you could do it if you wanted to, but the reality is, there's a tool for the job. If you've got a photo, use a JPEG. If you've got a photo with an alpha transparency, use a PNG. If you've got something that's just like a 5-color graphic, use a GIF might work, but use an SVG. GIFs can get down to super tiny file sizes if you only got 2 colors or whatever, or it might even be smaller than the SVG. So,
If you wanted to sort of add another layer to this and give like a user some interaction while they're viewing the SVG, like
yeah.
would there be a way to spoof like a view filter, like by just like using JavaScript to clean?
For example,
SVG?
most of those are in the United States, so maybe like have like little pulse coming off of California.
Well,
you're talking about like
more like displaying. Would there be a said like click a checkbox and it showed you a whole bunch of universities that popped up as dots or something like that? Would there be a way that you could like write JavaScript to like target the HTML that would change the SVG in your twig file?
yes.
All right.
Or you can do CSS. You want to like just highlight states that start with an M. You could just change your class and go.
Yeah. And ideally, if what you're doing is trying to get user input to change something stylistically, you would just use JavaScript to apply some classes and let CSS take over. That's the easiest way to do that. Write all the JavaScript you want as long as you're not hacking the site. Anything else? Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you for coming to my session.